Well, I'd like to introduce our next presenter for today, Kirsty Phease. Kirsty's the Senior Teacher for Blended Learning at Hawthorn, Melbourne, and she's going to be talking about her project today, which looks more at the teaching side of things. So she's going to be talking about her project, Professional Insights into the Journey of Changing from a Classroom Teacher to an Online Teacher. Thanks, Kirsty.
Thanks, Sophie.
All right.
Okay, all right, I think I'm ready to start. Okay, thank you, Sophie, for that introduction. And thanks, Ashley, for your presentation. It was really nice to hear everything that you've learnt from all your accent research put together so well like that. So hello, everybody who's listening. I'm taking a slightly different tack than Ashley did. I'm really looking at it from a teacher training perspective. And hopefully some of what I learnt and some of what I'm going to share with you will be useful in your context. But I'm going to start with my own personal context first here in Melbourne. So I work for the Hawthorn Melbourne English Language Centre, and normally we teach a wide range of different English language focuses, from general, academic. We have a high school program and a bridging program into the University of Melbourne. It is differentiated from a number of other Navitas English centres in that we have a highly experienced teaching workforce, with most teachers having multiple decades experience teaching ELICOS. But it is typified by most of the teaching workforce there being very skeptical of educational technology. And then into that context came March 2020, where COVID-19 locked down Melbourne. And thankfully, we are just facing some freedom away from that lockdown now. But it actually closed our campus for a long time, and we had to make, like a lot of places, a rapid switch with our students and our teachers onto an online platform. So I decided that for me to best serve the teachers in their training purposes, I needed to hear from them. I needed to get to know them. So I started to do some initial interviews online to find out how it was going as we transferred from face-to-face to online. And the first stage of my action research was focused on 5 participants, 5 teachers at the school where I teach. And there were 4 women and 1 man. And I started doing Zoom interviews with them, a semi-structured interview procedure. And each of these interviews were about 30 minutes long, and I had 5 interviews with each of the 5 participants over the period of about 2.5 to 3 months. Some of the interviews were much closer together than others. And as you can see from the diagram on the screen, the initial interviews were used as a jumping off point, and the topics that came out of these initial interviews were discussed further in the subsequent interviews. And the information which I observed and garnered from these interviews led to me with my training interventions and helping teachers with their training needs. Now, in these initial interviews, I used my research aims as the jumping off point with my questions. So I started all the initial interviews with these 3 questions. What personal observations are you as a teacher making about this transition to online teaching? In your opinion, what is and isn't working? And what training or support do you need as a teacher making this change? And that 3rd question was my research aim. I wanted to find out what support they needed, what training they needed, so that I could target and support them as much as I could. I looked at all of the information and all of the comments in these interviews, and I came away with 4 main interview findings. One of the first main findings was that all the teachers shared this very real sense of surprise. 2 of the comments which I've picked out from teachers, 3 comments. I couldn't imagine what it would look like Then you do it and it makes sense. It's surprising. Week 1 went surprisingly well. I was really surprised. It went really well. Now, these are just a small sample of the comments from the teachers in the first round of interviews, but they were universal. The teachers were really not expecting it to go well, and they were surprised to shocked when it did. I jokingly started to refer to this as the surprisingly well project because that phrase just kept coming up again and again. The newness of the experience was something that made it very difficult for them to visualize what their classes were going to look like and what the students' reactions would look like. And they were genuinely surprised with what happened and surprised that it went so well. The second main area of findings from the initial interviews was focused on time. And there were many, many sub-themes to this theme of time. The first sub-theme was focused on how teachers needed to spend more time preparing and planning. I know people who are spending 14 hours a day looking at their screen, planning, preparing, meetings, marking. I used to be able to get what I needed in 10 minutes because I know the course and I've taught it so many times. It takes so long to find new material and put it on Moodle one at a time. These two were really indicative of the wider range of comments that teachers made about how much time they were putting into planning. It was not only a very stressful time as we were making the change, it was a very time-demanding time. Teachers were putting in extremely long hours, not only with the new planning, but also having extra meetings, how to mark online. These were all challenging and time-consuming activities. Still on the topic of time, the teachers also came to realizations about how time needed to be used differently in online lessons. Here's two fairly typical comments. I think both teachers and students have this mindset to have a class in the same format time-wise as before. 2 hours, a break, 2 hours. But it really has to change. After the first day, I was just exhausted. They were very passive and just wanted to listen to me, but I can't do that anymore. Day 2 was better. I gave them exercises to do by themselves on Moodle. Now, these two comments represent a wider feeling that teachers came to at different points in their online teaching transition. They realized that they couldn't teach not only the same material in the same way, but they couldn't teach the same amount of activity or the same type of activity in the same format. They needed to have a lot more swapping back and forth between synchronous and asynchronous activities, and also between screen time and independent study activities. And this was a new experience and a new transition for teachers in this way as well. And lastly, on the issue of time, they also came to the conclusion that students and teachers needed to find a new personal professional boundary with their time. This is from a teacher discussing their student. I had one student who messaged me on Saturday night and asked me to do some extra speaking exam practice. The second comment is actually from a team leader commenting on how other teachers were asking for help. I've noticed that they email and ask for help straight away. They don't try by themselves like they normally would, but email straight away. This second comment in particular was a theme which came up a few times, that when students or teachers came across a new challenge or a challenging situation, they were much more panicky and immediate in their request or sometimes demand for help than they would in a normal situation. They would immediately turn to a text message or an email situation and really almost cry out for help, where sometimes maybe they would attempt to look at things or take a little time. This was a much more common response in the online environment. Out of these initial interview findings, I also had a theme of this teachers' perceptions, how they felt they were perceived by management and by the hierarchy of the school. I don't like to ask in the meetings as I don't want to take up everyone's time. They'll think I'm old and don't know what I'm doing. Some of us have been here for a long time. They know who we are. We're not used to all this technology. We're expensive for them. Among the participants that I interviewed, there was a very careful but audible expression of this opinion that they had to be very careful and mindful not to look like they needed too much help or not to look like they were not managing, because this would flag up an issue that they really didn't want to be flagged up with management and with hierarchy. And there was another takeaway that I got from the interviews was that they really wanted one-to-one help. They didn't want it in meetings or groups. I need to see it happen in real life as if you are observing a lesson. I want to see more examples of how to do it, videos of how teachers do it. It's reassuring. I'm more than happy to do these interviews with you. It gives me a chance to ask you what I'm missing. This second comment in particular was echoed a number of times. They felt that in these interview situations they had with me one-on-one, they were able to ask questions which they didn't feel comfortable or didn't feel that they should be asking in a broader general meeting or webinar situation. Now, out of all these findings from my initial interviews, it led me to create 3 interventions where I would try things to help teachers with this transition to online teaching and what I could do to support them and train them. The first of these interventions I called MiniTech Workshops. These MiniTech Workshops were delivered every day, Monday to Friday, and they were a 30-minute maximum period of time, but only 3 people could sign up maximum to any workshop. I would send out a Google Doc sign-up sheet every week so that people could sign up to whichever day and whichever time was most suitable for them on that day or at that time. They could sign up last minute. And there was no set schedule. I wouldn't do a workshop on anything that I had planned. I would simply wait for their questions and wait for their queries and their requests, what they wanted to practice. So it was responsive in nature. And the fact that these were virtually private practice sessions was one of the most widely appreciated aspects of these MiniTech workshops. When I did finish the MiniTech workshops, after doing them every day for a period of about 3.5 months, I sent out a questionnaire, and out of 24 responses that I received, 22 of them said that the limited number of participants was one of the key features that made it appealing to them. They really wanted an opportunity to practice or ask questions in an environment that was free of teachers, free of management, and free of students watching. Another one of my interventions is something which I've called inspiration videos. These inspiration videos were made by myself using screencast technology and were sent out twice a week, Wednesdays and Fridays, to all staff across Navitas. And they were instructional videos that would model one specific and one discrete activity. Not like a training webinar where there might be multiple topics, it would only focus on one tool or one skill. And all the videos were less than 8 minutes long. This was an advertised feature of these videos, that not much time would be needed. The videos were emailed out, and these could be watched at the teacher's availability. And also they were stored in a central location where teachers could watch them when they had time. This was one of the things that I felt came out of the interviews. Teachers were very time poor and also very stressed, and they didn't want to get training unless it was at the right time for them. So making it available would be a really good thing for them. These inspiration videos that were sent out became a really big time saver for myself and the other senior teachers, because maybe days or weeks after some of these videos had been made, it was only then that teachers suddenly realized that they wanted to know this or that they needed to know something. And at that moment, then they would email or text and ask. And at that moment, there would be a stored video ready to send to them. So we didn't need to make instructions or explain anything at the time. It could be very quickly given to teachers at the moment they wanted it. And the third intervention is based on assessment. I'll just give you a moment to read through those bullet points before I elaborate a little further. Throughout the interviews and the conversations I'd been having with teachers, assessment and how it was going to be delivered and navigated and managed online was an ongoing source of question and stress. So this needed to be addressed with training, specific targeted training. So I created an assessment webinar, which in total was about 50 or 60 minutes. But this webinar was delivered using a PowerPoint, and in each PowerPoint there was a separate discrete video. And each video on different PowerPoint slides would show one single part of the assessment journey. So for example, the first video on the first slide would show where the teachers could actually find the tests and the assessments. The next page and the next slide would show a video on how they as teachers could explain the instructions for these online tests and assessments to their students. Then another video on how they should invigilate or proctor these exams, another video on how to mark them, and then another video on how to then disseminate the grades to the students. Now, this was done in one big assessment webinar, but making sure that all the videos for each stage were separate was key. It meant that teachers could just digest the information they needed for that day, one at a time. It also meant, in a time-saving method again, that senior teachers could send or communicate the discrete information that a teacher needed on that day at that moment in one video. And all of these videos were less than 5 minutes. Now, from these interventions, I came away with a number of my own personal observations, findings, which I've tried to summarize as best I could here. My first observational finding is that training opportunities need to be discrete. They need to be focused and they need to be bite-sized. Larger one-hour trainings were less popular. We had much better uptake and utilisation of teachers accessing and absorbing the information from the training if it was shorter and very focused, and if they knew that they wouldn't need to commit so much time to it. Just watching an 8-minute video was far more appealing than doing a 60-minute webinar. My second personal finding was that video demonstrations were far more effective than any other way of communicating new computer processes. I would often encounter teachers who wanted to know how to do something at that moment, maybe a little panicky, and they would quickly get onto email, or they would call me on the phone and they would want to get an email or a phone reply. And often I had to talk them into doing it through Zoom or giving them a video. But once they had experienced it once, they were very, very quick to be converted. Video showed them where to look, where to click, and what things looked like, what they should be looking for on the screen. It also allowed them to share that video with students so that they could communicate instructions to students more clearly. And my third personal finding was that teacher training needed to be available for what teachers needed at that moment. Not what they might need in a week, not what might be interesting in a month, but what they needed right now. And when this was delivered in very specific targeted ways, it was really appreciated by the teachers. Okay, I'll finish up there. And I guess I'll open up and see if there's any questions that anybody has.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. If you have any questions for Kirsty, please type them in. All right, Kirsty, a couple of questions have come through already. Somebody's asked what you use to make the inspirational videos.
I personally use Screencast-O-Matic. I did start using the free version of Screencast-O-Matic, but in March, when my need for videos increased, I did get the paid subscription, and it has been a good decision. But I know that people often just use Zoom through their own recording as well for a similar purpose and a similar output.
Okay, great. Somebody's asked if you have any insights into how you can boost motivation and morale of teachers to get involved with online teaching.
One of the most useful ways I found was small scale, but it really did help. I did a series of team teaching with teachers before and after, but it definitely helped where they were after March in moving into online teaching. I would coordinate with the teacher before the lesson and ask them what paper-based or coursebook activity they would like transitioned and to do in an online environment, and we would talk about how we could do that. And then I would come into their classroom and co-teach with them. Very often I actually said nothing during that class, but the sheer fact that there was someone there just in case something went wrong was very reassuring to teachers. And in every situation that I did it, the teachers were all amazed that they were able to do it. They would just had that sense of achievement, which was very motivating to them.
Okay, great. Yeah, I really liked your idea also of the just-in-time training. So recognizing that if you overload people with everything all at once, it's much harder for them to assimilate. And so the videos, I think, really work really well in that respect.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any more questions for Kirsty?
Great.
Yeah, okay. I think that's it for questions, Kirsty.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, everyone.
So thank you again for presenting. And also I'd just like to mention that Kirsty's essay actually won the Award for Action Research in ELICOS this year. So congratulations for that, Kirsty.
Thank you. It's been a great year.
Yeah. All of the participants in the Action Research Program will now go away and work their research findings up into a submission for the Cambridge Action Research, for the Cambridge Research Notes publication, and they'll all be published by Cambridge Research Notes next year, probably around August. I put in the chat the number of the Research Notes edition that has the projects from last year's program so that you can have a look at them as well. There's Kirsty's reference list. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. We have 2 more days of the Colloquium, Wednesday and Thursday this week. Thanks to both of our presenters who presented their projects today. And thanks again to Cambridge Assessment English for coming along today. And thank you, Anne. We'll see everybody tomorrow.